And now I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for our concluding discussion, Eric Olson. Eric is Senior Strategic Director for Health and Food at the National Resources Defense Council and a Food Forum member. He brings a wealth of experience in consumer, public, health, and environmental policy and advocacy to the discussion, as well as historical knowledge, because he was chair of the planning committee for the very first sustainable diets and sustainability session we had at the Food Forum. So, Eric, all yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to wrap this up by inviting some of the speakers who did such a great job up, and I'd like to invite now Adam, Jess, Diego, Marco, and David to sit up here and join us for a discussion. Basically what we want to do is have each of these speakers reflect for 2 or 3 minutes really on sort of their takeaways from the discussion over the last day and a half. And to really, if you have some provocative thoughts that you think would be worth our considering, to put those out on the table. And we will have a Q&A session after those initial thoughts. And I think maybe I'll just start at this end. And maybe you can just start and give a couple of minutes of your overall thoughts, and if there are any specific impressions or provocative questions or thoughts that you wanted to share with the panel, just in a couple minutes. Sorry, this end, here. Yeah. Lucky you, Jess.
I haven't really thought about it too much in putting all my final thoughts together. But no, this was a great day and a half of really rich conversations, taking a lot of different perspectives from science and those working in the private sector. We didn't really have government here, and how policymakers really think about some of these issues. So maybe that was a bit of a gap. I agree. We need more of the social scientists here, putting the voice to producers and consumers, and as our colleague from Walgreens had said, really thinking about how does it affect the bottom line producers and consumers who have to make these choices around the food system every day. So I thought it was incredibly informative. It's a little bit overwhelming around the data. Some of it I get a little bit lost in myself of what it means. And I was reflecting a bit on your talk when you brought up the Livestock's Long Shadow, the FAO, very controversial publication. And I think I'm left a little bit with, if it's not specifically your area of expertise, you could go down a rabbit hole and not really know what is the best data out there. And I think this is the complexity of working in these multidisciplinary spaces. Like, I can look at climate data and maybe believe a report that I see and think it's robust, but I'm not an expert on climate change. And I think I was noticing that a lot throughout the day and a half, is that we're all coming from different perspectives, and it's hard to see what comes off the top. And we can believe each other and trust each other that we're producing the best science, but it makes it incredibly hard for policymakers or consumers or producers to kind of weed through this, when I have a hard time doing, and I think all of us on this panel can't say we're an expert in sustainable diets, because it's bringing together a lot of different disciplines. Am I being too negative? Sorry.
No. I think we're all.
But I feel a little bit that way you really brought up the point where there's some people who really believe what's in that report, and then there's others that are very critical of it, and you can unpack that across every report. And it was a little bit, too, of where is someone coming from? Where are they funded from? What's their perspective? What's the incentives for them to produce that data? So I was just reflecting on that a bit. And I guess the one other piece I come back with, and Tara Garnett was saying this at another conference I was at the end of the day, her summary was, it depends. And I think you're left a little bit with that as well, is the context, again, matters, but it depends on who you are, where you're coming from. And so, But I think, with all the minds that we've brought together, I think we have moved further in this space. We do know a lot more about sustainability. We have the SDGs as a framework, as a roadmap for how we navigate development. So I think we're getting there, and having conversations like this, where I think everyone in general agrees with the path forward, is a promising step.
Okay.
Compared to where we were 5-10 years ago.
Great. Thank you.
Well, I have a variety of thoughts. One thought I keep coming to throughout the meeting is one of equity, and how I think that a stable world is only world will only be able to be stable in the long term if we have equity within societies and across societies around the world. And if I look at how we're developing economically, the poorest countries of the world now are among the ones with the highest growth rates. We're heading toward, in the longer term, 50, 100 years, much greater equity. And then the cost of that equity, and all of life really is a trade-off. We all face trade-offs, and as we head toward many richer people on Earth, I keep thinking, what are the trade-offs? How can we appropriately choose what we eat, what kind of medical care we have, how we live, transportation, heating, everything else, what our energy sources are. Some random comments that bother me a bit was when talking about how much China emits versus some other nation. I care how much each person emits. I don't care where they live, but they do differ by where they live. And I think the same is true for human diet. And I think what we ultimately have to come to grips with is what do we, on average, as a citizen of Earth, have the right to do if we're going to have a world that is really equitable and sustainable in the long term? And we know that diet has major implications for health. I'd rather we had people living longer and healthier lives and reduce the morbidity and mortality rates. But there are prices from that go along with that we have to also consider. So I don't have a solution. I wish I did. We have to find a solution to these problems. We have to find a way that we come to grips with the various costs and benefits of the way that we live, and find a way to live that really is going to be able to sustain health for humans and health for the environment in the long term. We are not there yet. It's not a freight train about to hit a wall. There's time for rational thought and changes, but a lot of it are going to have to be changes in our behavioral choices, the things that we decide are good and bad, and the things that we decide we really want to do. And that is, to me, I think, is the really hardest question we face. How do we agree individually, as nations, as a globe, about the food that we eat, the choices that we make, how we produce energy, how we use land, how we preserve habitats, how we retain water quality, and so on? I don't know the solution. I know it's not a problem that any one of us can solve, but it's a problem that we have to find this incredible multidisciplinary, multicultural paths towards solution if we want to have a sustainable life on Earth, not just 10 years from now, but 1,000 and 10,000 years from now.
Thank you.
This is on. Okay. I'm a big fan for different perspectives, as I said before in my question. And I think if you look at different perspectives, things are actually not that confusing. I think. No, I think we can understand a couple of things, and very often I think it helps if you look at the very basic things, right? I mean, whether you agree with the livestock's long environmental shadow or not, and I think the 2013 update, for example, was pretty good. It's still a life cycle analysis, but it's one perspective, right? If you look at what is the basic for those differentiated footprints we have, then it's feed conversion ratios, and you always need to feed more feed to animals than if you would eat it yourself, in a sense, right? Whether they can make more use of stuff we can't make use of, yeah, of course as well, right? But what is the issue? Greenhouse gas emissions or land use, right? So that always depends what perspective you take. I think health is an important one. We talked a lot about greenhouse gas emissions in the last session, but it's clear that if we, at least in high-consuming countries, reduce our meat consumption, especially of red and processed meat, we would have quite large health benefits. And we have some mechanistic understanding of how red meat causes colorectal cancer, for example. So if you put that together with those very fundamental feed conversion ratios, it's clear that you have some benefit on both of those dimensions, right? We also know that plant-based foods in general, just from the production way, can be cheaper. They are often not, because they might be marketed in fancy supermarkets like Whole Foods or so to a specific demographic. But in general, they can be cheaper, right? So, and then it depends really how do we structure our food systems to make those available. And I guess the big question is, if we want to have dietary change towards more sustainable diets, whatever they mean, but they probably mean a little bit more plant-based. I guess what came out was also that they don't necessarily have to be vegan or so, but it would already help if they are a bit more plant-based, right? How can we do that, right? And I think the presentation by the colleague from the World Resources Institute was great to see this wheel of change that we have there. I mean, I see it in a way that, on an average level, sure, we probably won't go to like zero meat or anything like that, right? But it's probably likely to think about, some people might eat vegan like half of the week or so, right? Or a certain amount of time. So from a retail perspective, it might be actually really good to have those plant-based products, so you can choose that that you eat those one day, and on Sundays you splurge and have a Sunday roast or whatever, right? But if we only have red and processed meat one time in a week, that would probably be already a much more sustainable world. So for me, the challenges are really what are effective means of bringing about dietary change, not necessarily. I think the direction of where it should go is fairly clear if you look at multiple perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
The take-home message for me is that sustainable food systems are very complicated, multi-sectoral, and transdisciplinary, and we need an involvement of everybody, from social scientists to epidemiologists to the food industry, and all the sectors come together. I think it's helpful to go back to this FAO definition that says there are 4 domains of sustainability, and those are health and nutrition, economics, society, and the environment. Environment is one of the 4. It is not the only one. It is one of the 4, and we should be looking at affordability, health equity, social issues, labor issues, which were mentioned earlier this morning. All of those really are part of the broader picture. So it's focusing on only on the environment can be sometimes misleading, especially since the environmental context is different from one country and one geography to another. There are differences within the United States, there are global differences, and the data are not really all that great in many cases. And reasoning to the second point, auditing the data, understanding what the data are, and being able to model based on those data is another complex issue. And you saw from a presentation yesterday the extent of the data that is being collected by health metrics. FAO Stat, data from Nielsen, Mintel, Euromonitor, consumption data, all kinds of data come together, are being coded, converted into models. Essentially, this is what can happen with several $100 million from a foundation in Seattle, but this is probably money well spent, because this is the best picture that we have of the global patterns of disease. But again, these are the best people working on complex issues, and this is extremely expensive to be able to do that. And the third point is, let's not forget the issue of disparities in health equity. There really isn't a standard diet for everybody, vegetarian, vegan, Mediterranean, or whatever. Some of the diets are more expensive in terms of monetary cost. Some of the diets are more expensive in terms of carbon cost. They are not the same diets consumed by the same people. So I would say each of us has a different profile, and I would even argue that some of us who eat a healthy diet and healthy, nutritious diet full of good stuff, those diets are sometimes linked to a higher carbon content than a diet full of sugar. Sorry about that. It's probably true and unfortunate. And so some of us in this room probably have higher cost diets in terms of the environment, in terms of monetary cost, than many people outside this room. So let's not forget about inequalities, inequities, and geographic disparities. For example, in Seattle itself, within Seattle, I see differences in obesity rates in the order of 600% based on simply on where people live. And 600% difference in obesity rates just swamps any kind of difference by race, ethnicity, or age or gender or any other factors. Really, it is a socioeconomic difference because where people live is pretty much a reflection of socioeconomics. So I would say those three things: the definition of the 4 dimensions of sustainability, the need for good quality data, which is very difficult to maintain and keep up and do models based on, and then the issue of health equity and disparities in the diets. It's not the same diet for everybody. Let's pay attention to that. Thanks.
Thank you.
I think it's been a really full day and a half of interesting papers, rich with content. I think for me there's an interesting parallel between what we're going through in this room around sustainable diets and the dietary guidance process in the U.S. If you think back to the 1980s, I think was the first version of the dietary guidelines. At the time, there was a sense, the reason those came out in the first place was there was a sense that we need to tell the public something about what would be a good thing to eat. The public wanted to know. In fact, in the late 70s, the U.S. Senate was putting out dietary guidelines. They had the dietary goals for the U.S. And the idea of senators putting together guidelines really prompted the nutrition community and as well as the legislative community to say, we need to have professionals looking at this. Now, one of the interesting pieces I think is very wise in putting together that whole process of dietary guidelines for Americans was, let's put something out today, but let's revisit it in 5 years. And so we can say what we know to the public with the best science we have today. Let's not hold back on that. But let's give us an opportunity to revise it in a few years. And I think we're sort of at that point here with sustainable diets. We know a lot already about what we can tell the public, about what we can tell policymakers. And so we can go forward with that. And perhaps we should revisit it in 4 or 5 years to see if there's changes about what we need to tweak that advice. So I think that's one parallel. I think for me what's important is focusing on, and Marty and my work is focused on individual modeling. And I think the individual modeling of the individual is important because that is the individual that's going to make the decision of what to eat. That's where the change happens. And so if we want to move people towards less waste, towards more of a plant-based diet, then we need to know what are the drivers of those that are moving or motivating individuals. Which isn't to say that individuals live alone in islands by themselves. There's a social ecological context for each individual. There's the family setting and everything else that goes along with that person's lifestyle and environment. And so I think we need to focus more on what are the drivers of change. We heard a little bit about that from Karen at World Resources Institute on what can be some of the marketing drivers. We didn't hear a lot over the session about social media and how that can drive people's changes. We know that is a powerful driver of change. If we just look at the political environment and what's happened in the last election, social media is being used a lot for marketing, and so I think we need to tap more into that. Marketing in general is important, a driver of change. Certainly policies and food environments are also important drivers of change. And so I think all of those are important to look at when we think about how we can change individuals to move towards sustainable diets. To me, that means that we need to expand the actors involved in this work. And I think the committee that put this together did an excellent job. I mean, all the papers were really interesting. It was a great group of people. And perhaps next time we can, as others have suggested, including Nicole and Jess, we could expand the room and include more social scientists. Adam has psychology training, so we've got that covered. But there's sociology and there's anthropology and there's economists who are social scientists. Some people don't think of that, but they do model behavior around prices and income, so they're social scientists. But there's also people in business schools that are very good at marketing, and so I think we need to get some of those folks at the table as well. And then also I would argue that we need to have political scientists and politicians. We need to know how politics is, we need to get better at understanding what political drivers can create the will to make these changes, and then also how real-life politicians perceive the world and how they interact. And I think being in the same room with them and drinking wine with them and understanding how they think is a good thing for us to do. And we have a lot of industry representatives, which I think is great. It would be great to have some of the marketing people from the industry that are here, so we understand more about how the marketing works. And then finally, having all those different people in the room, I think, means that we have to get better at cross-disciplinary, transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary communication. Marty and I come from very different backgrounds, and we've sort of struggled through different bouts of language issues, and then there's publication styles, and what do we do with data things, and I think that all of us that are working on interdisciplinary teams struggle through that, but I think it's a fight that we need to keep doing, because that's how we're really going to get to a better conclusion. Great.
Thank you, Marty. So we're going to kick off Q&A, and I'm going to ask one question of you. It'll be a really easy question, I promise. So let's imagine it is January 21st, 2021, and a new president has just been inaugurated. And you're invited to be the czar of sustainable foods, sustainable diets, sustainable nutrition. That is your new appointment. And you are invited into the Roosevelt Room in the White House, and there are 4 people in the room. One is Bill Gates, who is going to be able to give money to whatever NGOs to do whatever he wants to do. The second person is the CEO of Walmart. The third person is the new president, and she wants to hear what you have to say. And the final person is you. And you're allowed 2 sentences to tell each one of those people what the number one thing is that person should do. So it's the CEO of Walmart, Bill Gates, and the President of the United States. So I'll let you start, Jess, on this very
Start on the other side. It depends.
Okay.
Let's start with Diego.
Thanks.
I would never take that job. How's that for a...
Thanks, Jess.
You were drafted.
Yes, you would. You'd take it in addition to all your other jobs.
Go ahead, Marty. You can start. Go ahead. Please.
Let's see. So I have 2 sentences to each of the of the people. Wow. Why don't we start in the middle?
Let me start.
Please.
Somebody wants to. Okay. I'll be very radical. I would say to the president, whoever she may be, that major problems with diet quality have to do with income and socioeconomic status. So the first order of the day would be redistribution of income. The second, to Bill Gates, is that it is time that foundations were responsible to somebody. Right now they have no accountability whatsoever. And in fact, they have taken over the function formerly served by governmental institutions. And I think it's time to go back to the FAO, WHO, and governmental institutions and step away from the foundations that are not accountable to anybody. And then for Walmart, I would say, and what are you doing about Amazon?
I don't think you have to ask that.
Provocative enough for you?
That's succinct.
All right.
Marco, why don't I ask you next?
Okay, so I think the number one thing is, congratulations, right? So, for getting rid. So I think maybe the one thing I would be happy about is if the new president could do away with the crazy dairy recommendations in the U.S. dietary guidelines. They are really the number one thing that basically tips the balance over to really non-sustainable diets, as we have seen in Marty's research. Associated with that, I guess we need a revision of the calcium recommendations, because that underpins that, although we know that doesn't have much to do with, I should not talk too much, but those are not very good at the moment. Then to maybe Bill Gates, I totally agree with what you said. I would also say rethink official development aid. So invest instead of specific food groups and dumping them on developing countries. Really think about how you can holistically develop sustainable food systems. And maybe with that, bring in Walmart to bring in the cold chains properly. But to Walmart, I would also encourage to think more about. There, I would encourage to think about the food groups, right? I mean, you showed a picture of a butchery, and talked about sustainable diets. I think that didn't fit very much with the discussion we have had over the 2 years, right? Yeah.
I could try. I think my microphone's off. I think I would encourage the president to have a cabinet and sub-cabinet secretaries who would be chosen because of the ability and desire to push a strong science-based agenda throughout the government. I think that with science-based agenda, I would assert that we can address many of the problems that this group has been discussing. To Walmart, I would encourage them to find ways to package and sell food that decreases waste at the consumer level, and that using your incredible marketing skills to get them to purchase more vegetables and fruits. And to Bill Gates, I'd say, give me money.
So I would say to the president, I would ask her if she could commit to the Sustainable Development Goals, and that the United States, as all countries, should be held accountable to trying or attempting to achieve them and not ignoring them as they have done so far. To Bill Gates, I would say increase investment in nutrition. Their portfolio for nutrition is very small compared to global health or compared to even agriculture development. Nutrition is just a very, very small piece of their whole portfolio. So, and I don't think Bill Gates is convinced of the case for nutrition, particularly on the undernutrition side. He doesn't see a 20% reduction in stunting if you scale up the Lancet specific interventions as one that's a worthy investment. So I would present the case to him that diets are critically important for him to be investing in. So that would be one thing. Has anyone ever met Bill Gates? I've actually had a conversation with him. You have to be very data-driven when you present to him, or he shuts you down in about 2 seconds. He's incredibly smart. And to Walmart, can I be provocative and say maybe to stop selling junk food? Be the first to just not have any junk food in your stores, being that you have so many.
Shelves in the back of the store.
That's obviously impossible because there's a consumer demand piece of that, but wouldn't that be amazing for Walmart to say, we're going to stop selling fat, sugar, and salt-laden junk food? Not going to happen, though, right?
Wow.
That would be my bold, ambitious ask.
So to the president, I would, if I'm the sustainability czar, I think I would argue for the importance of sustainable diets. I think I would try to make it clear why.
You got 2 sentences to do it, though.
Right.
No. Oh, what's my 2 sentences to do it?
I can give him a book.
Say to them.
Yes.
Her.
You know, the planet depends on us eating a sustainable diet. And there are many tools in your administration to deal with that, including, etc. Well, there's guidelines, there's food labeling, there's taxes, etc. And so that's my couple of sentences on that. I think in terms of the was it Bill Gates? I would combine. I was going to borrow somebody else's comments, which was Jess's comments on increasing his importance of nutrition in his portfolio. And then with Walmart, I like both the comments from Jess and from David, which is stop selling junk food and reduce the waste and sort of commit in the same way that y'all committed to health, commit to sustainable foods.
Great. Well, that wasn't that hard, was it?
Could I actually modify my Bill Gates ask, and now that I've thought of it more?
I'll give you one more sentence.
More money?
Yes.
I would request money to fund what I would call a Nobel-like prize for developing and popularizing the best tasting, healthiest foods possible, and do it via international contests, which are all sort of highly publicized and TV cook-off-like things until the winners are chosen.
Popular and sustainable foods.
Yeah. Yes, and sustainable.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you all. Those were all really provocative. I thank you.
National Vegan Burger Competition.
First question.
I can't wait for the new administration. I have my question is it's a question and a comment. It's coming from your comment, Jessica, on the data and how overwhelming was the data. My impression on the data, at least on some of the data, was it was like a mountain, and some of you were climbing it on different, on the north face or on the south face or on the east face, especially on the modeling of what would happen if the population was eating that much of meat or that much of protein. And I would love to see the conversions of these same data, because it looks like it is the same data, but you're just sparsing it in a different way, whether it's 1,000 calories or so. I really would love to see exactly the data that we saw yesterday and today that is on the modeling of the diets converge. And I don't know if that is possible for the people in the room, but I think we would benefit of having the data together. My second comment is really to Adam. When you say that when we don't take the 4 aspects of sustainability together, it's misleading. I think it's worse than misleading. I think it's really, if I take the perspective of the consumer and of the people that we really want to convince on not breaking the back of this planet, if we don't take into account affordability, accessibility, and health, I really wouldn't. I think we will not be able to convince them to do the job and to embrace the environment one. So we didn't hear a lot about that. We heard a little bit about that, but not much. So I don't know how you could be the ambassadors of sustainable diets with the 4 components, not only the environment one. I would love to hear your perspectives on that.
Let me start off with that. So as David said, the Bill and Melinda Gates Great Bakery Cook-Off would be for foods which are nutrient-rich, sustainable, affordable, appealing, and planet-friendly. What is that food? That's the point, But I think affordability is the issue.
How it will taste and how it's prepared will determine what it is.
Yes, I think those are big issues. I think the affordability is the issue that goes to the heart of health equity.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I wanted to make a request to the organisers of the food forum. I just want to say thank you. It was a great event.
Hold on, just one.
Sorry.
Did anybody else want to comment or respond?
Maybe.
Yes,
briefly.
please.
My idea was that it's actually not good to have only one data source, right? I think it's actually, all data is an imperfect description of reality, so it's good to have multiple sources, multiple perspectives. Otherwise, we end up in a dictatorship, right? We don't want that. So
my point was that they're not conflicting; they might be converging.
Yeah, it's good to sort of use different data sources and maybe ask the same question to different data sources and see if they agree. And if more of them agree, then that is a good thing, right? So in that sense, I would agree. But I wouldn't agree that we only need one data source.
Can I add something to that?
Sure.
I think we have seen a convergence in a way. I mean, we've seen the big models that Marco's done and sort of the food availability data that Marty talked about is converging with what we see at the individual level. Basically, we're seeing some of the same patterns. It's food waste. It's beef and dairy that are driving a lot of the environmental impacts. And so I think there has been convergence even in the last day and a half.
Okay, please.
A request that maybe we could have more focus, maybe another meeting on the economic impacts of these transitions in diets. I mentioned yesterday 28% of the global workforce is in this sector. I'm particularly interested in the economic impacts in vis-a-vis farmer income, particularly in developing countries, but also in developed countries. They are often the people who go to bed hungry. If they don't get a decent living, they're not going to be able to invest in these productivity increases that we need for the environmental reasons. So it would be great to have more research in that area and more discussion around it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. There was a Lancet series that just came out on the economics of non-communicable diseases led by Rachel Nugent, and that was a great series. I think we need the same thing. We need the same thing on nutrition outcomes as well. Obesity, you look at obesity and economic burdens as well as the undernutrition. We don't have very solid numbers on that, and then further on diet. So I think it's a great idea, Janet.
With the clean energy transition, which is a kind of corollary to what we're talking about here, we talk about human energy, but this just transition has been a critical issue in
Kate Houston, Cargill. I can be brief because I think we've covered most of my question with other people. But we've definitely talked a lot about this compelling case for having a broad definition of sustainability that covers the 4 dimensions. But even in this meeting, I sense that there's this sort of draw towards ending up weighting more heavily in discussing the planetary impacts versus the human sustainability impacts, even though we all acknowledge that they're equally important. I think part of the reality is that we get so siloed in our work, and I know it happens even in companies where we have experts with interest and passion around solving different elements of the broader challenge. How do we get those silos broken down? And do you have suggestions for ways in which we can get different parts of both the academic community as well as what's happening in the private sector and other places to think more holistically about the issues and the solutions, so we really understand the impacts of different solutions, not only in one area, but in all 4 domains? Thank you.
I can comment on that. The only way I've seen that gets people to collaborate on a regular basis from very different backgrounds is to somehow continually put them in the same place. And it's architecture or geography ends up being intellectual destiny. And so I've tried at my university I got a math professor across the hall from me, got an office for her. I got an economist down the hall, got an office for him, historian. But I had a building that had a room in it. It no longer has, that was a brand new building, so I had sort of usurped power and did it. But I really think we have to have ways to have those kind of interactions occur on a regular basis. And if it's something, there are, in many disciplines, there are working groups that get formed. You have some formal mechanism of funding which brings people together 3 or 4 or 5 times a year. I would say something along those lines, a working group with the diversity that we see here could make fabulous progress. But the first 3 or 4 meetings will just be finding out how we can actually communicate effectively, because we'll use the same word to mean different things. Yeah.
I think place, though, can mean lots of things. I mean, as you know, Kate, for the Global Nutrition Report last year, we set out the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals. And I know I keep saying that, but that is a place where the world met, as they did with the MDGs, and came up with this universal framework of action around sustainability. and sustainable development, and their diets are so central to so many of the 17 goals. And while I know a lot of people say they're irrelevant, well, they're not, because they bring every country to the table. They've all agreed on it much more collectively than they did with the MDGs. And donors rally behind those SDGs. They frame development over the next 15 plus years. So to me, we've got the place where we meet and discuss with our colleagues from different disciplines and different sectors. But there is this kind of global place, this framework. It's a global goal setting where I think a lot of the things we've been talking about over the last 2 days hit every SDG, both positively and negatively. So to me, we have sort of this universal framework that most people probably don't even know what the 17 goals are. But I think it's something that I hope, if you haven't seen them, read them, look at them, and really see where the work that we've been talking about the last 2 days, it fits into almost every piece. And it could have positive impacts on sustainable diets or negative impacts, depending on which SDG you're looking at. But I think we have this place where everyone's coming together and having a common conversation and language. I don't know, Kate, if you agree.
There's also a tendency for people to be focused primarily on one of the 17 goals. And there's a recognition that other goals impact that one goal, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, countries,
yeah. Across.
Well, countries are making these SDG plans. They've been doing it the last 2 years, these national strategies around SDGs, mainly low and middle income context countries. And they do prioritize. So for Nepal, they don't care so much about life underwater because they're landlocked. And so they're not worried so much about that SDG. So I think there's countries that are prioritizing half of them and what they can feasibly do in the next 10 years. But almost every country has focused on SDG 2, which is hunger, agriculture, and nutrition. Almost every country has prioritized sustainable diets. Because SDG 2 is sustainable food systems, yeah.
Yeah, I have a different approach to breaking down silos at a micro level, not dealing with country politics or the high level. But at the University of Washington, we just had approved a major in food systems, an undergraduate major in food systems, nutrition and health, which is going to be run by the School of Public Health in collaboration with the School of Business, the School of Law, Engineering, Environmental Engineering, the College of the Environment, College of Built Environments, and I'm hoping that the faculty will come together and talk initially about the undergraduate curriculum, but eventually about research and joint projects and joint grants and so on. So this is the first time actually the School of Public Health is collaborating with business and the School of Law. And food systems is the line that draws everyone together. It's the mechanism to bring everybody together. As I said before, it's very multidisciplinary, it's very multi-sectoral, and brings in people from all aspects of the university, all together working for population health. It's one of the few such new undergraduate majors in the country, and we're very happy to have it.
Great. There you go.
So Jess and David have talked about the importance of working together, either in a place or on a specific project, and Adam expands that to think about studying together across disciplines. I think there's two things I would add to that. One is I think we need to convey a certain humility to our upcoming our students that are coming up, that what they study or what they know about is not everything. That there's a humility about their disciplinary knowledge that allows them to understand that there's something else out there that they need to learn and respect other people's talents and disciplines. And then the other thing is we've talked about working together. I think the other part that's really important is playing together. That as people, yes, we're scientists, yes, we're academicians, yes, we're professionals, we work in whatever, but we also are, in order to get along with each other, it's important to play together. It's important to have a reception after this thing and to go out to dinner and to schmooze with people in a way that you get to see them as people, even if you don't. It makes it easier for you to get over those hurdles of when you don't agree with something or you don't understand what they're talking about or you have a different objective in terms of your research. So I think that let's not forget about the play part.
Thank you.
I want to echo that, and I think the important word here is tolerance, really, for other disciplines. I mean, we very easily get very arrogant about the methods used in different disciplines, and I think if we can, if we think about how different disciplines and different sectors also of the economy, what is the fundamental motivation of those, right? And they might be, usually they're not there to do any harm, right? But they might do something that by others is perceived as doing harm, but that is generally not their motivation, I would say. So by asking deep questions about what drives them instead of what the outcome currently might help bring about mutual understanding and breaking down some of the silos. And I mean, a good example is the Democratic-Republican divide in this country, right? I mean, if you're a Democrat, I mean, and if you, as a Democrat, think about Republicans, they probably don't mean bad, right? They have good motivations. Some things might come out the wrong way, but I think we just need to talk to each other and be tolerant for different views and bring things forward, really.
Thanks. So we only have a couple minutes left, so let me ask the two people in line to very succinctly, just like a sentence or so question, so that we can get at least a little feedback from the panel.
My name is Li Yang. Thanks for your presentation. My question really go back to the moderator's questions. Exactly, what would you ask the money sources, whether the millionaire or the government, to do the best things for the best interest of our general public and reduce all the harm and very bad legislation or bills to waste taxpayers' money while they torture our general public. So I just wonder if we can, as a collective effort, to ask a millionaire or our government officials to do the right things. And then maybe with just environmental issues, you have to have a cost-benefit analysis. You want to save the planet, you want to save your children and your elderly, and with the least cost to them and suffering to them.
Okay, thank you. And we'll ask the final questioner to
Hi
ask
there,
her question.
my name is Haley Swartz. I'm with the National Consumers League, and I actually have a question that's fairly related. So I was at FDA's public meeting last week on the term healthy and natural. So I don't know if you know, there's a proposal to have a specific definition of healthy that would go on all packaged goods as well as natural. And I'm in the process of writing our comments right now, and I'm quite overwhelmed. And so I would love to sort of hear your thoughts on regulation, and more specifically packaged goods, which have kind of gone in and out of this conversation quite a bit. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anybody have reactions to either question? We only have a couple minutes left.
I have a comment. I'm going to play grumpy academic here and say, for a definition of what is a nutritious food, read my paper from 2004, before many people were born, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, which introduced the concept of nutrient profiling by nutrients, and the FDA is now extending it to allowing the definition of healthy to include food ingredients. But I don't want to get into the weeds of nutrient profiling. Let's talk another time. It's a way of assessing which foods are healthy and which foods are not.
And I can't imagine a way to find natural that's actually going to impart the appropriate information. There are ways to grow crops which maximize nutrition and food safety that you would say are unnatural, and ways which you say are natural. And there are ways to do things that are natural that are harmful. To me, it's a worthless word. We probably could use some other ways to define how crops are grown if we have the ability to separate them in the pipeline. It would be much more informative. I mean, there are ways you can use fertilizer more efficiently and therefore have lower greenhouse gas and lower pollution impacts. That would be useful information. There are ways to minimize the presence of pathogens on them that would be useful. So.
Okay, any other burning responses? Because we're about out of time. Well, thank you, panel. Phenomenal discussion. Really a fascinating process. Thank you. questions.
We didn't say
They were.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I think at this point we should have a big hand for all of the presenters, the moderators, you as attendees, the questioners, and everybody on the web. So a big hand for everybody concerned. And just a couple of housekeeping chores. The slides will be posted to the website with permission from the presenters, and an archive of the video will be posted soon. There'll be brief proceedings of the workshop, which will probably be available this fall, and a full written report early in 2019. So a sincere thank you to Heather, to Cypress, to Romy, and especially to Anna, since this is her last Food Forum meeting. So let's hear it for the terrific staff. And I want to say, I think we have broken down some silos. At least we've gotten some silos to talk to one another in this particular scenario. But just a word in passing as we think about what we've learned, and it's kind of a saying that I had heard and I've heard resonating a lot in the Obesity Roundtable, in which I also serve, which is progress happens at the speed of trust. And hopefully we've developed quite a bit of trust here. So thank you.